If you are one of the fewer and fewer people who are fortunate enough to have a pension, one of the decisions you're going to have to make is the decision of whether to take your pension in a lump sum or in installment payments. Now, in previous videos, I mapped out what a pension is, and I also described the typical options presented on a pension election form. But that can leave you wondering which is the best option for you. And the answer is, I don't know. And there's a number of reasons for this. First of all, there are going to be objective factors of your circumstance that I just don't have access to. So, for instance, that's going to be your life expectancy, how healthy you are, how solvent the pension company or your employer is, and so on. Additionally, there are subjective features about your psychology and other things that I am not privy to. How risk averse are you? How good at handling finances are you? And so on. And so I thought the least useless thing I could do would basically be to give you a pro and con list. So in this video, I'm going to give you 6 reasons to take the lump sum and 6 reasons not to take it. But first, just a word on the phrase lump sum. So in the literature, you will often find the lump sum referred to in a couple of different ways. The first is the commuted value of the pension, and the second is the net present value of the pension. Now, essentially, these are calculations in today's dollars as to how much it would cost to recreate your pension over a period of time. But the first thing you need to realize is these are, I don't want to call them guesses, because the actuaries who create these would probably break out in a rash. But at the same time, there are assumptions that have to be built into these calculations, and those assumptions may or may not hold in every case. So the assumptions can be off, therefore the calculations can be off. How off would they be? It's anybody's guess. I'll just give you 2 examples of assumptions that are typically built into calculations of this kind. The first is there's got to be some assumption as to what your longevity is, what your life expectancy is going to be, how long you're going to live. In order to generate a calculation as to how much it would cost to pay you for the rest of your life, there has to be some assumption as to how long you're going to live. The second assumption is the rate of return. It's not as if the pension company or your employer has a bundle of cash stashed away in a mattress somewhere with your name on it. They have money invested in certain instruments, and those instruments generate a rate of return, and that money is then used to pay you and other pensioners their payments. But the rate of return that is assumed is going to affect the calculation, and it's going to affect the lump sum amount that you're offered. In general, the higher the rate of return that's assumed, the lower your lump sum amount will be. And the reason is because with a higher rate of return, you can generate more payments with less capital. Now, it's traditional in debate to start with the pro position. So if I frame the issue as, should you take your pension as a lump sum, then the yes answer is the affirmative and the no is the negative, so we'll start with yes. Let me preface this section by saying there's really going to be 2 types of reason here. The first is going to be a reason that's actually in favor of the lump sum, and a second is going to be a reason that is against the installments. So if you have a reason against the installments, but the only 2 options are lump sum and installments, then a reason against the installments is going to be a reason for the lump sum. So the first reason is because it's more flexible. Let's say you understand finance, you've been handling your own money for years, or maybe you have a money manager that you trust implicitly and you just want the flexibility of receiving the lump sum and doing what you like with it. That would be one key reason why a person might select a lump sum. A related reason, number 2, is because you think you can get a better return on your money. Now, this one may require a little bit of explanation. So the fact of the matter is if you select the lump sum, you will get the commuted value of your pension. And if you select installment payments, it's not like there's any principal that you have access to or that you're comparing the rate of return against. So in fact, this is a little bit of an odd way of speaking that you think you could get a better rate of return. It's not clear. In some cases, a person might think that they can get a better return on the lump sum than the payout rate represented against the commuted value. In other cases, though, probably more commonly, a person is thinking something like this. When the lump sum calculation is performed, as we just said, there is an assumed rate of return. Most likely that rate of return is not going to be something like 8%. It's going to be something very, very conservative, perhaps tied to government bonds. Government bonds right now, short-term bonds, are paying less than 1%. Longer-term bonds you might be lucky to get 1.5%. So if we're assuming a rate of return of 1% or less, or 1.5% at most, then a person might think this way. They might think, if I take the lump sum, I can invest it, get a better rate of return than what I could have gotten on government bonds, and generate an income stream for myself that would be greater than the projected payouts that this pension is expected to pay out. So if a person thinks he or she could get a better rate of return elsewhere, then they might favor taking the lump sum. Number three, a person might think that if they take the lump sum, they're not really giving anything up because they could create their own pension by purchasing an annuity, for example, with some or all of the lump sum amount. So you might think, I can have the best of both worlds. If I take the lump sum, I have the flexibility of using some of the money for one purpose and using the other money to purchase an annuity that would guarantee my income stream the way the pension promised to do so if I took the installments. Now, a related reason here would be maybe your spouse already has a pension, and so this would just simply be icing on the cake. So if you have all of your guaranteed income needs already taken care of, maybe you are confident in Social Security, your spouse has a pension, maybe you have an annuity on the side already, then you might have no compelling reason to add an additional pension into the mix. Maybe you'd prefer to have the bundle of cash and simply roll the dice in the market. Number four, you might favor a lump sum if one of your focuses is on legacy or wealth transfer. It's certainly the case that with a pension payment, you may have a survivorship election. So if you were to pass and you're the pensioner, then your spouse may continue to collect a percent of that pension for the rest of his or her life. That percent could be 100%, it could be 50%, it could be any percent. And for more information on this, consult my video on pension election options. But once you and your surviving spouse both die, the pension terminates. In most every case, the pension terminates and there is no more money left over for legacy. Nothing goes to the kids and so on. So you might think, if I take the lump sum, I invest it somewhere, I withdraw safely from it for years and let the money continue to grow. Hopefully, if my rate of return surpasses my withdrawal rate, then whatever's left over can go to kids, can go to grandkids, and becomes my legacy piece, if everything works out. Number five, you might worry that pension installments do not properly keep up with cost of living adjustments or with inflation. Now, a quick way to get a fix on this is the rule of 72. Historically, the inflation rate is supposed to be about 3.4%, a little north of 3%. Now, we can quibble about the number. Some people might think it's too high. Probably some people think it's too low. Regardless, so if we take 72 and divide it by 3, we get 24 years. That means that at 3% inflation, the cost of goods and services is expected to double over the course of 24 years. If we select instead 4%, we see that it could double as quickly as 18 years. Inflation is all over the map. It's been up as high as double digits, and it's been into the negatives historically. However, if the average rate of inflation is 3.4%, that means that sometime between now and the next 24 years, you can expect prices are going to double. So if your cost of living right now is $50,000, 24 years from now, your cost of living could be $100,000. Now, there's a lot that's assumed here. As retirement writer Tom Hegna has pointed out, your retirement can be thought of as being divided into 3 phases, which he somewhat humorously refers to as your go-go years, your slow-go years, and your no-go years. Humor aside, the basic idea is that early on in your retirement, you might be spending quite a lot of money on travel or on going out to eat. Whereas later in your retirement, as you start to slow down, you can expect that some of those travel expenses might fall away. But at the same time, you might be unlikely to require long-term care early in your retirement, but as you age, the probability you're going to need some kind of nursing assistance goes up. So it's really hard to get a fix on what your expenses are going to be, but inflation certainly is a factor, and in some people's minds, the best way to deal with it is to take the lump sum and put the money into the market. Number 6, and final one in favor of the lump sum, people worry that pensions can be lost. Investopedia says there's at least 3 different ways that your pension can be lost, and these include things like mismanagement of funds, or hostile takeovers, or leveraged buyouts of your pension company or your employer by corporate raider types or private equity firms. If your pension company goes broke, those installment payments aren't going to do you much good. So the idea behind taking the lump sum might be, we just want to cut and run. We want to take our money and get out of Dodge. If the company ends up going out of business, it doesn't affect my retirement. Now let's segue into some of the reasons why you might disfavor the lump sum and prefer installment payments instead. The first reason to point out here is that investments are more subject to things like market risk and sequence of returns risk than pension installments would be. And as previously mentioned, the hope that investments might help to stave off cost of living increases or inflation risk may be misplaced, as a person might only be able to address those risks by increasing their exposure to market risk or by lowering or reducing their safe withdrawal rate. A second reason you might disfavor the lump sum and prefer installments is if your investment experience or your investment knowledge or your track record in investing are lackluster. If you've had very poor investment experiences in the past, you might be very hesitant to accept a lump sum and to accept all the risk that goes along with it. Number 3, this one's a little harder to say, but if you are not disciplined about your finances, you should be very hesitant to take a lump sum. If you don't have a budget, if you don't have a plan for what to do with the lump sum payment and you're just going to end up sticking it into an account, you run the risk of drawing it down prematurely. You got to remember this amount, if you take the lump sum, is in lieu of a pension. You do not have a guaranteed income stream, and if you take that lump sum, it's up to you to make that money last for the rest of your life. So a person who's undisciplined, doesn't have a plan, might prefer installment payments because that guaranteed level of income is set in place, at least in principle, for the rest of their lives. Now, I'm not saying that the majority of people are going to be spendthrifts, but there is the possibility of blowing that money a little bit too early if it's just sitting in an account without any plan to go along with how to use it. Number 4, although pension installment payments do have tax implications for sure. Anytime you have money reportable to the IRS, there's going to be tax implications along with that money. But in some cases, the implications for taking a lump sum can be greater, just because the amount is greater. It depends on how you accept the amount. If you were to roll your pension over into an individual retirement account or even a 401k, you might be able to push those tax liabilities down the road. But if you take that money and put it into a non-qualified account or an account that's qualified differently than an employer-sponsored plan or than a traditional individual retirement account, then the tax bill could come due immediately. And a significant lump sum would almost certainly catapult a number of people into a higher tax bracket. Number 5, we discussed at the outset a number of assumptions that have to be baked into the various calculations for what the lump sum actually is. So if you don't understand the calculations, that in and of itself might give you an incentive to pick the installment payment. Not that you think that you have a better handle on how the installment is calculated, but the lump sum payment is kind of a trade-off. They're giving you a flat amount, a set amount of money in lieu of paying you for the rest of your life. So if you don't understand how that equation balances out, so to speak, then it might be advisable to steer clear of the lump sum. A secondary consideration might be if you think the lump sum is a lowball figure. And this might occur, for example, if an overly high or unjustifiably high rate of return is assumed. Now, I don't know how often this occurs, but once again, if you don't have a handle on the figures, or if you're not sure that the figures come out in your favor one way or the other, it might push you in one direction or other. Now, an allied consideration here is that it is arguable that companies would prefer that you take the lump sum. And in some people's minds, that indicates something about how the installment payments are to be preferred. If the company prefers you take the lump sum, then you should prefer that you take the installment payment. The basic idea is this: just like companies have been favoring the 401k instead of the traditional pension plan, and the reason they're favoring the 401k is because the risk is on you. The risk is on the retiree, the investor, to make sure that your money pans out. The risk is not on them. In a similar way, when the company can get you to take the lump sum, they're essentially washing their hands of any risk that you're going to run out of money in retirement. It's not on them, it's on you. Number 6, and relatedly, a person might prefer installment payments if they think that the life expectancy or longevity assumptions that were baked into the commuted value are inaccurate or don't apply to them. Especially this is the case if you think the company is assuming a shorter life expectancy than you think you actually have. This gets us into really dicey territory. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know when we're going to die. We could die at any time. But at the same time, you should plan for the worst and hope for the best. So if you're not prepared to live into very old age, the danger is you might run out of money. And if you know that your employer has used a shorter life expectancy figure than you feel comfortable or than you think applies to you, that should give you a reason to pick the installment payments instead. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is that if they've used a lower life expectancy figure, then the lump sum that they're offering you is smaller than it would have been had they used a longer figure or a figure with a greater life expectancy. And you can't go back 20 years down the road and ask them to use 25 years instead of 20 or however many years they factored in. Once they cut you the check, the transaction is over and they're out of the picture. And if you're healthy or if you have longevity in your family, you might think that you're likely to live a little longer than the company is assuming you're going to live. If that's the case, then the fundamental reason that people pick installment payments is because those installment payments promise to guarantee them at least a basic level of income for the rest of their lives. And those installment payments don't have the traditional worries associated with investment accounts. You don't have the traditional worry of your investment risk, what stocks to pick, what your allocations are. There are no fees associated with transactions that move your money around. All of those transactions are invisible. They're downstream from your point of view. The company handles the investment and you just take the check. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no risk associated with installment payments, as we've discussed. There is risk that the company might go out of business. But in summary, let me put it this way. It's arguable that the real positives involved in taking the lump sum are, number one, the flexibility, and number two, the growth potential. And the main negative is that all the risk is on you to make the retirement dollars last for the rest of your life. If you do not take the lump sum, then the negatives are that it is rigid, and what you see is pretty much what you get. Once you have accepted a certain payout amount, that amount is unlikely to change. Most pensions don't have cost of living increases, although yours might. At the same time, there's arguably less market risk associated with those installment payments. Fundamentally, the greatest positive with the installments is that in principle, you have guaranteed lifetime income, and you have a supplementation to other sources like Social Security that are going to provide for your basic needs for the rest of your life. Now, of course, I should give the usual disclaimers. This video has been for general informational or entertainment purposes only. I can't give you specific advice, and so if you need personalized recommendations or evaluations, you have to consult a licensed expert in your area, somebody who is familiar with the particulars of your situation and can factor all of these things in. You can have a conversation about your life expectancy, about your family history, about your health. You can talk about your risk tolerances, and you can weigh your options and get into greater detail. In general, it's probably a good idea to ensure that you have a basic amount of guaranteed income, but for some people, that might come from a spouse's pension or for Social Security, and certainly if you already have plenty of guaranteed income, then your options are multiplied. If you found something of use in this video, I ask that you like it. Click the subscription button, click the notification bell to be alerted to new content as it becomes available. I thank you so much for being with me today, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video. Thanks a lot.